Now, we've looked at the effects of meth contamination on properties some time ago, and we thought that it was high time, pun intended, to revisit the topic, particularly with all the recent developments we've been seeing in Western Australia. Now, one thing we found is there seems to be a level of uncertainty due to the lack of regulation as to what actually constitutes a dangerous level of contamination, and, as such, what requires remediation. This is due to a lack of guidance by government. And this has left little choice for many meth testing companies but to operate off guidelines developed around the remediation levels to be used on a property following the manufacturing of the substance. Is this the right number? Well, the jury is out. The use of this remediation figure, which is 0.5 micrograms per 100 square centimetres as one to measure the maximum safe level, has created some discord within the industry, with one side standing strong by this metric and the other believing that the level has been chosen for the remediation of labs only, as all other extremely nasty chemicals, which are expensive to test for and used in the manufacturing of the drug, would have been brought to safe levels at this point. In essence, the question comes back to, do the levels of contamination that come from recreational smoking of the substance present a danger to the community? Now, regardless of this uncertainty, both sides agree that the danger is very much real for occupants of properties that have been used in the manufacturing of the substance. This leaves the question, should the insurance industry pick up the tab? In my view, before we, as an industry, start offering cover for this exposure, it's important to note that without remediation, the drug remains present on the property indefinitely. A certificate to demonstrate a clean bill of health should be considered before cover is afforded. This is just to ensure that the contamination occurred during the period of insurance. I sat with Ryan Matthews, a passionate advocate of the industry and a founder of a company by the name of Mythscreen, a company that conducts screening of the drug, to hear more about his views on the issue. Enjoy.
So Mythscreen is a property drug residue testing company. So we specialise in testing properties for the presence of methamphetamine specifically. We cater for various stakeholders, tenants before they rent a property, prospective buyers before they buy a property, insurers wanting to protect a property. We're dealing with banks as well to recomply a property before they go back on the market. It's definitely based on suspicion, largely due to some drug activity. Not a lot of odour, not a lot of visible sign. Yes, traditionally if you see a meth lab, someone's been actively cooking a lot of drugs. There's definitely some staining and there could be some odour and also some damage. But I would say a large amount of the time the visible signs are not so great. People that usually are on ice at some point get a little bit unhappy. You know, they might be coming down, so that they tend to damage the property, kicked in doors, holes in walls, missing light bulbs. They can take those light bulbs and turn that into a glass vessel to actually smoke the drug out of. So if there's missing light bulbs, that's another warning sign. Staining. And obviously talking to neighbours, they're always a very good source of information. I just want to make a point that not everyone gets affected. So a healthy adult might not get as affected with a low level in a property. But the signs that we are seeing in people that come to us are children. They get respiratory issues, so asthma type symptoms, persistent cough, behavioural issues like ADHD symptoms in children, rashes on their body. Issues with their sleep, and that can be from young children, also the elderly. Adults, if you're more of a sensitive individual, you can also get those symptoms as well. But it really varies on the level of contamination, the sensitivity of the individual. The way that the methamphetamine gets into the pathway into the body is through dermal exposure. So when someone actually smokes the drug or cooks the drug, it creates an aerosol, lands on the hard surface, turns into a crystal or crystallines, and that will get into your skin. So children on the floor, carpet, soft furnishings, it's going to absorb that contamination more, and they're rolling around, dragging themselves against the wall, putting their fingers in their mouth, things like that. So the method that we take the samples in is called NIOSH 9111, and that's an internationally recognised standard, and that is the method that we actually collect the sample, So we actually take the samples. There's a specific technique that we actually follow that all our technicians are trained to use. And that is the way that, we take the sample inside the 100 square centimetre template, and then that gets sent off to a laboratory, which also has an accreditation for the method, NIOSH 9111, which is generally a NATA accredited facility. So our process is using an NIOSH method to take the sample through with a chain of custody, and it gets sent to a laboratory with a similar accreditation for NIOSH 9111. So we're trying to keep it internationally recognised and using the highest standard possible within the industry. So all our technicians are trained, and they are trained to only take samples for meth. So we're going to look for cold airflow, and we're going to try and follow where that airflow would go, and think of where would be the most likely place that actual methamphetamine vapor would travel. So 3/4 of the way up a wall, like close to a window opening, that's obviously a common place. Above the doorway, a ducted aircon system, exhaust fan, ceiling fan, things that are going to be moving air around or close to where the air is going to be moving around. 0.5 is the guideline level that's set by the Crime Commission, and some experts obviously created that level. That level is the level that a property has to be cleaned down to. So at the moment, when somebody's testing, Mythscreen or another company is actually testing a property for drug residue, it gets analysed at a laboratory, and we get the total microgram level that's present in that 100 square centimetre space. So if that level is above 0.5, then we need to bring that room down to its pre-loss condition. So we need to actually, somebody would have to remediate that room under that level. And the guideline is the only current thing in Australia that anyone has to go by. There's no standard, there's nothing else. Some of the individual states have their own more specific detail around how to deal with the contamination, but obviously 0.5 is all we have to go by. So it has been set for the most vulnerable, for children, the elderly, and people with sickness. That's what the level's been set for. So some could argue that it's too conservative for other people, but currently we have to distinguish that 0.5 and then clean down underneath that. So in New Zealand, to make it a little bit clear, they have a 1.5 standard, and then they also have, if it's a drug laboratory, they have to clean it down to 0.5. Okay, so that's an example of how they have dealt with it. In Australia, the current level is 0.5, and that was set to deal with drug laboratories. So because we can't test for mercury and acetone and all these other chemicals, because it's very expensive, testing for drug residue or meth contamination, meth residue is obviously the most economical way and easiest way to deal with it. So if you're cleaning that room or space below 0.5, then in theory you have also dealt with all the other chemicals in that environment. So that's why it's been set to 0.5. They say 0.2 of a microgram gets emitted through aerosol from one session. So you could say one session could be half a gram or a gram of smoking the drug in one particular place in that room. So from the studies that I've seen and been spoken to about, it's about 0.2 of a microgram. Now the guideline's 0.5. So someone could smoke multiple times, let's say 5 days in a row, and then that room would be over 0.5. I think there'll be, if they bring out a standard, it would be for also cover usage, for the use of the drug. And I believe if they do encounter a meth lab, then the cleaning would also go to a lower level of 0.5. I do think that the level in New Zealand of 1.5, that was obviously the highest in the world. So it was the highest jurisdiction, which is Colorado, which actually has a level of 1.5. So New Zealand essentially has matched the Colorado level, and that's why they came to that. So 1.5 is actually the highest in the world out of 25 jurisdictions. Do I think it will increase in Australia? Potentially, but I do not believe it will go to 15. I think that's not possible. In New Zealand, Sir Peter Gluckman was the Chief Science Advisor for the past national government and also the now current Labor government. So he got asked to create a report by the Housing Minister into exposure levels, and if the level that was set by the previous government in the standard, NZS 8510, if that was acceptable. So there's a lot of commentary around wasted money with Housing New Zealand, remediating properties which they thought was not necessary. So Gluckman's gone and selected bits of information from various people and some studies globally, and he has found that there's not enough evidence to say that there's risk for a low level of meth. So essentially where he's looked and the information that he's found, he can't find that. There's an argument where other people have a very different view on that. Some US toxicologists and also some Australian toxicologists basically are saying that because you don't have enough information doesn't therefore mean it's safe. There's data gaps, which is primarily why you create a conservative level. Put that aside, 15 and 1.5, it really just depends on the jurisdiction that, is governing whatever the level's created, if they're going to accept some of the information that he's provided. A lot of people would want to actually have science, not just an arbitrary opinion to create that level. Some would argue that he's just hasn't found enough evidence, therefore he's saying it's safe. So, will it change the landscape in Australia? I think some certain stakeholders might want to favour that level because it obviously is a better outcome for them. And others would argue that that's, not an acceptable place to be. I believe that any level above 0.5 should be disclosed. I mean, that's just based around the RTA, like with your duty of care, because any level over 0.5, based on the guidelines, deemed contaminated. So a property that's got a contaminant in it is not safe, clean, and in good repair, right? So if you don't disclose it at that point, then you could be in breach. If you were an investor and you had your own rental property, you're about to put tenants in, there's a potential risk putting anybody into a dwelling that they might get involved with drug activity and they could compromise your property. So what we would advocate for is to get a baseline test at the start of the tenancy, so to validate the safety of the property, putting those tenants in there, disclosing that information, so giving them, we provide a safe certificate of living of the property, so that information is disclosed to the tenant, which acts as a deterrent for the tenant to actually engage with drug activity. So they're going to think twice before actually doing that in the first place. Reminding them at the end of the tenancy it's going to be tested once again. If there's contamination found, there's a burden of proof on that tenant. The tenant would there be liable. It's going to be a lot easier from an insurer's perspective. It's going to be a lot easier from a tribunal's perspective. Withholding the bond could cover the excess, etc. So there's a lot more recourse that can happen if the burden of proof is created by testing between tenancies. Essentially, that's what Mythscreen feel is the way forward. We cannot stop these people doing this drug. It's impossible to really, make sure people don't do it in people's properties. But what we can do is create a deterrent from this happening. Have a look online for some credible companies that only specialise in testing, not remediation and testing, and like Mythscreen, and come in can do an affordable laboratory-based test. $250 to $300 can give you an accurate report and an understanding of how much methamphetamine is actually in the property. Or you could jump online and, there's some various places you can buy some presumptive test kits, for $100, and you could do those yourself, some self-testing kits. That's just going to give you an indication, like, is there something present or not? It's not going to give you a lot of information, but, those are the two options. You either go and get someone like Mythscreen to independently take the testing, or you can do it yourself to get a validation, is there an issue? And then from there, you could go forward with further testing. So you can go online, most of the keyword searches under meth testing, you would find us, first page, so methscreen.com.au. You can go online and see our pricing and our services that we offer. You can call us on our 1-800 number or obviously email us on info@methscreen.com.au.